I still remember the smell of that tiny kitchen. Vanilla, lavender, and a faint hint of cocoa butter. My hands were covered in streaks of foundation as I carefully mixed my latest batch. I didn't have fancy equipment, just a few bowls, a spatula, and a blender I'd probably ruined beyond repair. But I had a dream, and that was enough. My dream wasn't complicated. I just wanted to create makeup that made people feel seen. Growing up, I'd walk through beauty aisles filled with foundations that either ignored my skin tone or made me look like an orange traffic cone. I'd try blushes that didn't show up on my skin or eyeshadows that made me look washed out. The message was loud and clear. Beauty wasn't for people like me. It wasn't just about the products either. The ads I saw featured the same faces: white, flawless, unattainable. No diversity, no imperfections, just an endless loop of women who looked nothing like me. I used to dream about being included in that world, but after years of rejection, I realized something. If the beauty industry wasn't going to make space for me, I'd make my own space. And that's how Glimmer was born. And if you'd met me a few years earlier, you wouldn't have guessed I'd end up in the beauty industry. Back then, I was just a broke grad student, working part-time retail jobs and wondering how I was ever going to pay off my student loans. The beauty world wasn't new to me. I'd worked at a few makeup counters and done freelance makeup gigs on the side, but I'd also seen the uglier side of the industry. Customers would roll their eyes when I tried to help them, assuming I didn't know what I was doing because of the way I looked. Managers would tell me to tone down my opinions, which was just a nice way of saying, don't rock the boat. The final straw came when I applied for a product development role at a major beauty brand. I had ideas, big ones. I wanted to create products that catered to everyone, not just the same old shades of beige. But the hiring manager barely listened to me. He smiled politely, thanked me for my time, and handed the job to someone with half my experience. That rejection lit a fire in me. If no one else was going to create the products I wanted to see, I'd do it myself. So there I was in my tiny apartment kitchen, mixing foundation in bowls I'd stolen from my mom's house. I didn't have investors or a team, just me, a pile of ingredients, and a notepad filled with scribbles about undertones and pigment blends. I spent weeks perfecting the formula, testing it on myself, my friends, anyone who was willing to try it. My first breakthrough came when one of my friends, who had been struggling to find her shade for years, tried it and said, "Mia, this is perfect. This is me." That's when I knew I was onto something. I named the company Glimmer because I wanted it to feel magical. Like that moment when you look in the mirror and actually like what you see. The first product I launched was an all-natural foundation line with 25 shades, something practically unheard of at the time. I wasn't aiming for perfection, I was aiming for realness. Social media became my best friend. I set up an Instagram account, posted before and after photos, and shared the stories of real people who used my products. The response was overwhelming. People loved the honesty, the inclusivity, the idea that beauty wasn't just for a select few. Orders started pouring in. At first, I packed and shipped everything myself, staying up until 3 a.m. to make sure every package was perfect. When the workload became too much, I hired a few friends to help. My apartment turned into a mini production line, with boxes stacked to the ceiling and jars of foundation everywhere. Glimmer was growing faster than I ever imagined, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. That's when Carter came into the picture. Carter showed up at just the right time, or so I thought. We met at a networking event I almost skipped because I was too busy packing orders. He was smooth, confident, and annoyingly charming. He told me he worked in finance and had helped a few startups grow into multi-million-dollar companies. At first, I was skeptical, but the more we talked, the more it seemed like he genuinely believed in my vision. Carter and I started dating soon after, and he quickly became a part of both my personal life and my business. He offered to help me manage the financial side of Glimmer, which was honestly my weakest area. I was good at creating products, marketing, and connecting with people, but taxes, budgets, forecasts, that was a different language. Having Carter around felt like a weight off my shoulders. He helped me set up a proper accounting system, introduced me to potential investors, and even negotiated better deals with suppliers. He seemed like the perfect partner, both in business and in life. By the time Glimmer hit its first million in revenue, Carter was my CFO, my boyfriend, and my biggest cheerleader. Or so I thought. Looking back, there were warning signs I ignored. Carter started questioning my decisions more and more. At first, it was little things. suggesting we cut costs on packaging or raise prices on bestsellers. Then it escalated. He wanted to reformulate products to save money, even if it meant compromising on quality. Mia, he'd say, you need to think about the bigger picture. Profit margins are what investors care about. But our customers care about the quality, I'd argue. That's why they love us. He'd sigh like I was being naive and tell me I was too emotionally attached to the brand. There were other moments too, subtle ones, like the way he'd take credit for my ideas in front of investors or dismiss my concerns as overthinking. I chalked it up to stress. After all, running a business wasn't easy, and we were both under a lot of pressure. But deep down, part of me knew something wasn't right. If only I'd listened to that part of me sooner. Glimmer was growing faster than I ever could have imagined. What started in my tiny apartment kitchen had exploded into a global phenomenon. Major retailers were calling, begging to stock our products. Influencers raved about us, and beauty editors labeled Glimmer the next big thing. Every time I walked into a store and saw our displays, I felt like I was living a dream. But dreams, I learned, have a way of turning into nightmares. Under Carter's financial direction, the brand reached new heights. He negotiated deals that got Glimmer onto the shelves of high-end department stores and international markets. Sales skyrocketed, and the investors couldn't have been happier. Carter was hailed as the golden boy, the financial genius behind Glimmer's success. At first, I was grateful. I'd never been comfortable with the business side of things, and Carter's expertise seemed like exactly what we needed. But as the company grew, I started to feel like I was losing control. It started small. Carter began making decisions without consulting me. At first, it was things I didn't think much about, adjusting budgets, tweaking marketing strategies. Trust me, Mia, he'd say. I've got this. I wanted to believe him, so I did. But then I started noticing the changes in our products. Our signature foundation, the one that put us on the map, felt different. The texture wasn't as smooth, and it didn't blend the way it used to. I asked our production team about it, and that's when I found out Carter had approved a reformulation. I was furious. Why didn't you tell me? I demanded when I confronted him in his office. He leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed. Mia, we had to cut costs somewhere. The margins were too thin. This is how we stay competitive. But our customers love that formula, I shot back. That's why they're loyal to us. He sighed, like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. You're too emotional about this, Mia. You need to think like a CEO. We're not running a boutique brand anymore. This is a corporation. I wanted to argue, to tell him that the whole point of Glimmer was to not be like every other corporation, but he brushed me off before I could say more. Trust me, he said again. This is how we grow. But it wasn't growth. It was greed. The complaints started rolling in not long after that. Customers flooded social media with posts about how the foundation felt different, how it wasn't the same product they'd fallen in love with. A few influencers even called us out, saying Glimmer was selling out. I felt like my heart was breaking. Glimmer wasn't just a company to me. It was my life's work, my passion. Seeing people lose faith in it was like losing a part of myself. When I brought the complaints to Carter, he barely looked up from his laptop. It's just noise, he said. People complain about everything online. Don't let it get to you. But it's not just noise, Carter, I insisted. These are our customers. We promised them quality, and we're letting them down. He rolled his eyes. You're being dramatic. The sales numbers are fine. That's all that matters. That was the moment I realized we didn't share the same vision anymore, if we ever had. For me, Glimmer was about people. For Carter, it was about profit. Things came to a head during a board meeting a few weeks later. I'd called the meeting to address the customer complaints and propose returning to our original formulas, even if it meant cutting back on expansion plans. But Carter had other ideas. As I presented my case, Carter interrupted me. With all due respect, Mia, he said, his tone dripping with faux politeness, this isn't realistic. Scaling back now would send the wrong message to our investors. We need to stay on course. I tried to argue, but he turned to the board, spinning a narrative that painted me as naive and out of touch. Mia's passion is what got us here, he said. But running a company of this size requires more than passion. It requires strategy. And sometimes that means making hard decisions. I could see some of the board members nodding, buying into his logic. What are you saying, Carter? I asked, my voice shaking. I'm saying you're too close to this, he replied, looking me directly in the eye. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Glimmer needs a leader who can think objectively. My stomach dropped as the realization hit me. He was orchestrating my removal. Sure enough, he'd already spoken to the board behind my back. They voted that same day to remove me as CEO, citing differences in leadership direction. Carter was named my successor. I walked out of that boardroom in a daze, barely able to process what had just happened. The company I had built from nothing, the brand that carried my blood, sweat, and tears, was no longer mine. And Carter, someone I had trusted, someone I had loved, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I wanted to fight back, to claw my way back into the company, but the contracts Carter had drawn up when we first brought on investors made it impossible. I had no shares, no ownership, nothing to leverage. I was out, completely. The days that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I left my office for the last time with a single box of personal belongings. Photos, notes, little reminders of what Glimmer used to be. I moved into a small apartment, barely able to afford the rent, and spent most of my days staring at the walls, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. As if losing Glimmer wasn't enough, I soon discovered that Carter's betrayal went beyond business. Rumors began circulating about his behavior, his backdoor deals, his manipulation of the board, even whispers of infidelity during our relationship. The man I thought was my partner, my rock, had been lying to me all along. For weeks, I felt like I was drowning. Glimmer had been my life, my identity. Without it, I didn't know who I was anymore. But somewhere in the depths of my despair, a tiny spark of anger began to burn. Carter might have taken everything from me, but he hadn't destroyed me. Not yet. And deep down, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. When I moved into my tiny studio apartment, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. It wasn't just the size of the place, though it was small enough that I could stretch my arms and touch opposite walls. It was the emptiness. No more late nights working on Glimmer. No more excitement over product launches or brainstorming sessions with my team. It was just me, a lumpy futon, and a stack of boxes I hadn't bothered to unpack. For weeks, I felt like a shadow of myself. Without Glimmer, who was I? I'd poured everything into that company, my time, my energy, my heart. Now it was gone, stolen by someone I thought I could trust. Some days I'd scroll through social media, torturing myself by looking at posts about Glimmer, the photos of our products in stores, the hashtags from influencers, the ads. Everything looked so polished on the surface. But I knew what was really happening. The brand had lost its soul. I spent most of those days sitting by the window, staring at the city below and wondering if I'd ever feel like myself again. The email came on a random Tuesday afternoon. I almost didn't open it, assuming it was another job rejection or spam, but the subject line caught my eye. Thank you, Mia. Inside was a message from a former Glimmer customer. She wrote about how Glimmer's products had helped her feel confident for the first time in her life. She talked about how finding a foundation that matched her skin tone had been a game changer and how Glimmer had inspired her to embrace her unique beauty. I just wanted to say thank you, she wrote. I know you're not at Glimmer anymore, but I hope you know what a difference you made. I read that email 3 times, and by the end, I was crying. Not the silent, graceful kind of crying you see in movies, the ugly, full-body sobbing that leaves you breathless. It wasn't just her words that moved me. It was the reminder of why I started Glimmer in the first place. It wasn't about profits or board meetings or flashy marketing campaigns. It was about people. That email reignited something in me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. I didn't rebuild overnight. It started small, just me, my laptop, and an idea. I realized that while I couldn't go back to Glimmer, I still had something valuable to offer. My knowledge of the beauty industry. Over the years, I'd learned the ins and outs of product development, branding, marketing, and customer engagement. I knew what worked and what didn't. So I started reaching out to small, independent beauty brands, the kind of brands that reminded me of Glimmer in its early days. These were passionate founders with big dreams, but no idea how to navigate the complexities of the industry. At first, it was just a few clients, friends of friends, small startups looking for advice. I helped them refine their branding, develop product lines, and connect with their target audiences. Word spread quickly. Before I knew it, I had more clients than I could handle. I officially launched my consulting firm, focusing on empowering small beauty brands to succeed without losing their authenticity. Every time one of my clients hit a milestone, a successful product launch, a feature in a major magazine, a surge in sales, it felt like a piece of me was healing. Through my work, I began to let go of the pain and resentment I'd been holding on to. Helping others succeed reminded me of the joy I'd felt when I first started Glimmer. It wasn't about the money or the accolades, it was about creating something meaningful. But letting go wasn't easy. I couldn't help but keep tabs on Glimmer. I'd see news articles about their declining sales, customer complaints, and scandals under Carter's leadership. Part of me felt vindicated. It was proof that Glimmer couldn't survive without its original vision. But another part of me felt sad. Glimmer was my baby, and watching it fall apart was like losing it all over again. One night, as I sat on my couch scrolling through another round of bad press about Glimmer, I realized something important. I couldn't move forward if I kept looking back. That was the night I made a vow to myself. I'll never let anyone take my purpose away from me again, I whispered. Over time, I began to reflect on the lessons I'd learned from Glimmer's rise and fall. The biggest lesson? Purpose comes first, always. Sophia, the founder and CEO I'd admired since I was young, used to say, "If you're not making the world better, what's the point?" I hadn't truly understood what she meant until now. Glimmer had started with purpose, to celebrate inclusivity, diversity, and authenticity. But somewhere along the way, that purpose had been overshadowed by profit. And the moment we lost sight of our values, everything started to fall apart. I made a promise to myself that night. Whatever I built next, whatever I did in the future, would stay true to my purpose. I wouldn't chase quick wins or compromise my values for the sake of a dollar. I might not have Glimmer anymore, but I still had my vision, my drive, and my ability to make a difference. And I was just getting started. The Mia who sat in that tiny apartment weeks earlier, lost and broken, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and ready to take on the world again. Because if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was this: I wasn't done. I wasn't surprised when Glimmer started to unravel. I could see it coming, like a slow-motion car crash I was powerless to stop. Even though I wasn't part of the company anymore, Glimmer was still my creation. Watching Carter destroy everything I'd worked so hard to build was devastating, even if part of me felt vindicated. Under Carter's leadership, Glimmer became a soulless corporation. Gone were the values that had made it special: the focus on inclusivity, quality, and celebrating every customer for who they were. In their place, Carter introduced a series of flashy marketing campaigns designed to appeal to the masses, but they felt hollow and out of touch. He slashed costs wherever he could, prioritizing profits over quality. The foundation line that had put us on the map? Reformulated again? The all-natural ingredients I'd fought so hard to source? Replaced with cheaper alternatives. Even the packaging lost its charm, downgraded to something generic and uninspired. At first, the changes didn't seem to hurt the brand. Sales were steady, and the investors were happy, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Glimmer's loyal customers, the ones who had supported the brand from the beginning, were the first to notice the changes. They took to social media, posting side-by-side comparisons of old and new products. "This isn't the same Glimmer I fell in love with," one post read, accompanied by a photo of our original foundation bottle next to the newer, cheaper version. "The formula feels cheap now," another customer complained. "It doesn't even match my skin tone anymore. What happened to this brand?" The backlash spread like wildfire. Influencers who had once championed Glimmer began distancing themselves from the brand, publicly calling out the decline in quality and authenticity. One particularly scathing video from a major beauty YouTuber went viral with the title, "What Happened to Glimmer? The Rise and Fall of a Beloved Brand." I watched the video with a mix of sadness and disbelief. The creator broke down every misstep Carter had made, from the product changes to the tone-deaf marketing campaigns. It was like watching someone dissect my life's work, piece by piece. But the worst part? They were right. As the backlash grew, Glimmer's sales began to plummet. Customers who had been loyal for years stopped buying, opting instead for indie brands that still felt personal and genuine. The financial strain was compounded by a series of scandals. Reports surfaced about poor working conditions at the overseas factories Carter had chosen to save money. A whistleblower revealed that workers were being paid below minimum wage and forced to meet impossible production quotas. Then there were the false advertising claims. Customers discovered that some of Glimmer's new products didn't live up to their marketing promises. Lawsuits followed, draining what little goodwill the brand had left. Even the brand's messaging, once praised for its inclusivity, had taken a hit. The new campaigns were noticeably less diverse, featuring the same cookie-cutter models that dominated the industry. Glimmer had lost its identity, and everyone could see it. As Glimmer's revenue plummeted, Carter's confidence began to crack. He tried to put on a brave face, issuing statements that dismissed the backlash as temporary growing pains. But behind the scenes, he was scrambling. He pushed out a string of last-ditch efforts to save the company. A new product line rushed to market, a partnership with a controversial celebrity, a desperate attempt to rebrand with flashy ad campaigns. Nothing worked. Investors started pulling out, and the board, once firmly in Carter's corner, began to lose faith. They held emergency meetings, demanding answers and questioning whether Carter was still the right person to lead the company. But Carter, in his arrogance, refused to admit he was wrong. He blamed the customers, the market, even the media for Glimmer's failure. Anything but himself. By the time the company filed for bankruptcy, Glimmer was a shell of what it had once been. Its reputation was in ruins, its loyal customers gone, and its products forgotten. I wasn't surprised when the news broke that Glimmer was filing for bankruptcy. I'd been following the company's decline for months, reading every article and watching every headline with a mix of emotions I couldn't fully untangle. Part of me was heartbroken. Glimmer was my baby, and seeing it reduced to nothing felt like losing it all over again. But another part of me felt satisfied. Not happy exactly, but validated. I tried to warn Carter, tried to tell him that cutting corners and abandoning our values would lead to disaster, but he hadn't listened. And now, everything he'd built on the ashes of my work was crumbling around him. Still, there was a part of me that couldn't let go of the sadness. Glimmer didn't have to end this way. If Carter had stayed true to the brand's roots, if he'd valued quality and authenticity over profits, it could have survived, maybe even thrived. But he hadn't. And now, the dream I'd built from scratch was gone. Or so I thought. Sitting in my office one evening, I scrolled through an article about Glimmer's bankruptcy, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. The company was being dismantled piece by piece, its assets auctioned off to the highest bidder. I stared at the screen, an idea slowly forming in my mind. Maybe Glimmer wasn't gone after all. Maybe it just needed the right person to bring it back to life. And maybe, just maybe, that person was me. The collapse of Glimmer wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something new, something better, something that could finally honor the vision I'd had all those years ago, standing in my tiny kitchen with a bowl of foundation and a dream. I wasn't done with Glimmer, not yet. The headline hit me like a punch to the gut. Glimmer files for bankruptcy amid scandals and financial woes. I stared at the article for a long time, reading every word even though I already knew the story. The once beloved brand that I had built with my own two hands had finally fallen apart. Carter's reckless leadership had destroyed it, just as I knew it would. The details of the bankruptcy were brutal. Glimmer's sales had plummeted to an all-time low, and its debts far outweighed its assets. Lawsuits from customers and former employees piled up, and investors were abandoning ship faster than Carter could spin the situation. As for Carter himself, he wasn't just failing, he was falling. His name was splashed across headlines, but not in the way he'd always craved. Instead of being hailed as a financial genius, he was being called a cautionary tale, a man whose greed and arrogance had brought down an empire. I should have felt triumphant. I should have been celebrating his downfall, but all I felt was a strange, hollow sadness. Glimmer didn't deserve this. The people who had fallen in love with the brand, who had believed in its mission, didn't deserve this. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was my chance to make things right. At first, I told myself to let it go. Glimmer was part of my past, a chapter I'd closed when Carter and the board forced me out. I'd rebuilt my life. My consulting firm was thriving, and I'd finally found my footing again. Why would I risk all of that for a brand that had caused me so much pain? But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I worked with one of my consulting clients, I thought about what Glimmer could have been. Every time I saw someone complain online about how far the brand had fallen, I felt a pang of guilt, as if I'd abandoned it when it needed me most. One evening, during a call with a longtime client, I found myself venting about the situation. "It's just so frustrating," I said. "I know what Glimmer needs. I know how to fix it. But maybe it's too late." My client, a scrappy, fearless entrepreneur I'd been mentoring for years, laughed. "Mia, I've seen you pull off miracles. If anyone can bring Glimmer back from the dead, it's you." Her words stuck with me. For days, I wrestled with the idea, torn between fear and determination. Part of me wanted to leave Glimmer behind, but another part of me, the part that had built the brand from nothing, knew I couldn't. This wasn't just about a company. It was about reclaiming what was mine. Once I made the decision to act, there was no turning back. The first step was gathering the resources I needed. Over the years, my consulting firm had done well, better than I'd ever expected. But buying back Glimmer wouldn't be cheap. I started by liquidating some of my investments: real estate, stocks, even a piece of art I'd picked up during one of my rare vacations. It all went into the pot. I also reached out to a few trusted allies in the industry, people who believed in me and my vision. "I'm going after Glimmer," I told them, my voice steady despite the nerves buzzing in my chest. Most of them were supportive, though a few cautioned me against it. "It's a risky move, Mia," one of them said. "Glimmer's reputation is in shambles. Are you sure it's worth it?" "I'm sure," I replied. "Glimmer isn't just a brand to me. It's a part of who I am, and I know I can bring it back." With their support and a lot of late-night planning sessions, I pulled together enough funding to make an offer. The auction for Glimmer's assets was held in a sterile conference room at a downtown law firm. It was a far cry from the glamorous settings I'd once associated with the brand. When I arrived, I slipped into a seat at the back of the room, keeping a low profile. The room was filled with bidders, investors, liquidators, and a few industry insiders, all circling like vultures over a carcass. One by one, the auctioneer rattled off items: Glimmer's remaining inventory, its manufacturing contracts, even the rights to its logo and name. For most of the auction, I sat quietly, watching as people fought over the scraps of what had once been a thriving empire. It was painful to see Glimmer reduced to this: a series of transactions and price tags. Finally, it was time to bid on the rights to the brand itself. The auctioneer opened the bidding, and the room went quiet for a moment before the first bid came in. The numbers climbed slowly at first, then more quickly as the major players began to compete. I waited, letting them fight it out until the bidding started to slow. Then, when the room was nearly silent, I raised my hand. The amount I offered wasn't huge, not compared to what Glimmer had once been worth, but it was enough to make the room turn and look at me. The auctioneer glanced at me, then back at the room. Going once, going twice. Sold. Just like that, Glimmer was mine again. When the paperwork was signed and the auction was over, I sat alone in the empty conference room, holding the folder that contained the rights to Glimmer. I felt a strange mix of emotions: pride, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Glimmer had been my dream once, and it had turned into a nightmare. But now I had the chance to make it something new. I ran my fingers over the logo on the folder, remembering the countless hours I'd spent sketching designs and testing formulas in my tiny apartment. This wasn't just a business to me. It was my heart, my soul, my purpose. I took a deep breath, standing tall as I walked out of the building. Glimmer was mine again, and this time, I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, I knew that. Restoring Glimmer's reputation, winning back customers, and rebuilding from the ground up would take everything I had. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. It was time to bring Glimmer back to life. The first day back at Glimmer didn't feel like a triumphant return. It felt like walking into a house that had been abandoned for years, dusty, broken, and almost unrecognizable. The once bustling energy of the office was gone, replaced by silence and empty desks. Carter's mismanagement had gutted the company, and now all that remained was a shell. But as I stood in the office, gazing at the faded logo on the wall, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt determined. This wasn't just about restoring Glimmer. It was about proving to myself and everyone else that the brand could be great again. The first step was merging Glimmer with my consulting firm. It was a practical decision. My firm already had a small but talented team who shared my vision for ethical, customer-focused beauty. They weren't just employees. They were dreamers, innovators, and fighters. I called a meeting with my team, laying everything out on the table. This isn't going to be easy, I said, looking at each of them in turn. Rebuilding Glimmer is going to take time, effort, and a lot of late nights. But I believe in this brand, and I believe in us. If we stay true to our values, I know we can bring it back. Their enthusiasm was immediate and genuine. Some of them had been fans of Glimmer long before joining my consulting firm, and they were excited to be part of its rebirth. Together, we started brainstorming ideas for a fresh start, focusing on what made Glimmer special in the first place. Rebuilding Glimmer's reputation was the most critical and most difficult task. The brand's name had been dragged through the mud during Carter's leadership, and many customers felt betrayed. If we were going to win them back, we had to start with honesty. The first thing I did was issue a public apology. In a heartfelt video posted to Glimmer's social media accounts, I addressed the customers directly. I know Glimmer has let you down, I said. The products weren't what they used to be. The values we started with were lost. And for that, I am deeply sorry. But I want you to know that Glimmer is under new leadership now, and we're committed to earning back your trust. The video was met with mixed reactions at first. Some customers were skeptical, while others expressed cautious optimism. But I knew actions would speak louder than words. We began a complete overhaul of the product line, starting with our foundation, the product that had put us on the map. I worked closely with our chemists to return to the original formula using the same high-quality natural ingredients that our customers loved. We also committed to ethical practices across the board. Every step of the production process was scrutinized to ensure fair wages, sustainable sourcing, and minimal environmental impact. I wanted Glimmer to be a brand people could trust again, not just for its products, but for its principles. Once the foundation formula was ready, we launched a campaign called Back to You. The idea was simple. Reach out to the loyal customers who had supported Glimmer in its early days and invite them to be part of its rebirth. We sent out personalized emails, offering free samples of the new foundation and asking for their feedback. The response was overwhelming. Customers shared their stories on social media, posting photos of their samples with captions like, "Glimmer is back and it's better than ever." Slowly but surely, the trust began to return. We also partnered with a few key influencers, people who genuinely believed in the brand's mission. These weren't the flashy big-name influencers Carter had chased. They were smaller creators with loyal followings who valued authenticity over hype. One of them, a beauty YouTuber named Kayla, posted a glowing review of the new foundation. "This feels like the Glimmer I fell in love with," she said in her video. "The formula is amazing, the packaging is gorgeous, and I can tell they're really trying to make things right." That video went viral, and within days, our website traffic skyrocketed. Orders poured in, and for the first time in years, Glimmer felt alive again. Rebuilding Glimmer wasn't all victories and applause. There were plenty of challenges along the way. The industry was skeptical of our comeback. Competitors whispered that Glimmer was a has-been brand, a relic of a trend that had passed. Retailers hesitated to stock our products, unsure if the brand could regain its former glory. And then there were the financial hurdles. While my consulting firm had been successful, it wasn't enough to fund every aspect of Glimmer's revival. We had to get creative, cutting costs where we could and relying on grassroots marketing instead of expensive ad campaigns. There were days when I questioned whether I'd made the right decision. The weight of responsibility was heavy, and the fear of failure loomed large. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself why I was doing this. This wasn't just about business, it was about redemption. One particularly tough day, I found myself sitting alone in the office, staring at the original Glimmer logo framed on the wall. It was a reminder of where I'd started and how far I'd come. Sophia's words echoed in my mind. "If you're not making the world better, what's the point?" I took a deep breath, wiped the tears from my eyes, and got back to work. As the months went on, the challenges became easier to face. The industry started to take notice as Glimmer's sales grew steadily. Retailers who had been hesitant began reaching out, asking for meetings. But the real victory was the customers. They weren't just buying products. They were sharing their stories, connecting with the brand, and reminding me why I'd started Glimmer in the first place. One day I received a message from a customer who had been with Glimmer since the beginning. She wrote, "Mia, I just wanted to say thank you. I stopped using Glimmer when it changed, but now it feels like it's home again. You've brought it back to life, and I'm so grateful. I read that message 3 times, letting the words sink in. We still had a long way to go, but in that moment, I knew we were on the right track. Glimmer wasn't just back, it was better than ever. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Glimmer was more than a brand to me. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, there's always a chance to rise again. And this time, I wasn't just building a company, I was building a legacy. It started as an ordinary day. I was in my office, finalizing the details for Glimmer's upcoming relaunch campaign, when the door burst open without so much as a knock. Carter. I hadn't seen him in years, but time hadn't been kind to him. He still had the same arrogant swagger, but his suit was rumpled, his tie askew, and there were deep lines etched into his face that hadn't been there before. He looked desperate, angry, and most of all, out of control. Mia! He snapped, slamming the door behind him. What the hell do you think you're doing? I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms calmly. Good morning, Carter. To what do I owe the pleasure? Cut the crap, he said, his voice rising. You think I don't know what you've been up to? You sabotaged me. You destroyed Glimmer just so you could swoop in and play the hero. I stared at him for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. He was pacing now, his hands gesturing wildly as he continued his tirade. You couldn't stand that I was running the company, could you? He accused. You've been pulling strings behind the scenes, waiting for me to fail. Admit it, Mia. This was your plan all along. I stood, walking around my desk to face him directly. You really think that's what happened? I said, my voice calm but firm. You think I sabotaged you? He stopped pacing, glaring at me. It's the only explanation. There's no way Glimmer could have collapsed like that unless someone was working against me. I took a step closer, meeting his gaze head on. You're right about one thing, Carter. Someone destroyed Glimmer, but it wasn't me. It was you. The words hit him like a slap. He opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't let him. You're the one who reformulated the products, I said, my voice gaining strength. You're the one who prioritized flashy marketing over quality, who ignored the customers, who cut corners at every opportunity. You're the one who turned Glimmer into a soulless corporation. And guess what? The customers saw right through it. That's why Glimmer failed. Carter took a step back, as if my words had physically pushed him. I was trying to save the company, he said, his tone defensive. No, I shot back. You were trying to save yourself. You cared more about your ego and your bank account than you did about the brand, or the people who built it. And it cost you everything. I paused, letting my words sink in. You didn't just lose the company, Carter. You lost me. And that's why it all fell apart. For a moment, Carter looked like he might argue again, but then his expression changed. The anger faded, replaced by something else, something softer, almost pleading. Mia, he said, his voice lower now. You don't have to do this. We don't have to be enemies. We could work together again. Imagine what we could accomplish if we combined our strengths. I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. You mean if I let you back into the company? He nodded quickly, stepping closer. Yes, think about it. You're the creative genius, and I know how to handle the business side. We could rebuild Glimmer together, make it bigger than ever. I studied him for a moment, trying to figure out if he actually believed what he was saying. It was almost laughable. This was the same man who had betrayed me, who had called me too emotional to run the company I'd built, who had pushed me out with nothing. And now, here he was, asking for a second chance. Carter, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Do you honestly think I need you? He blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. I'm just saying we'd be stronger together. You can't deny that. I shook my head, a small smile playing at the corners of my lips. That's where you're wrong. I don't need you, Carter. I never did. He stared at me, his confidence crumbling. But, no, I interrupted, my tone sharp. You had your chance and you blew it. You betrayed me, you betrayed Glimmer, and you betrayed the people who believed in us. And now you want to come crawling back acting like none of that matters? It doesn't work like that. I walked back to my desk, opening the door, and gesturing for him to leave. This conversation is over. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at me like he couldn't believe what was happening. But then, slowly he turned and walked toward the door. Just before he stepped out, he paused, glancing back at me. "This isn't over, Mia," he said, his voice low and bitter. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Yes, Carter, it is." As the door closed behind him, I let out a long breath, feeling the tension drain from my body. I walked back to my desk and sat down, staring at the logo on the wall. For years, Carter had been a shadow over my life, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. But now, that shadow was gone. I wasn't just reclaiming Glimmer, I was reclaiming myself. I thought about everything I'd been through, the betrayals, the setbacks, the moments when I thought I'd never recover. And then I thought about how far I'd come, the company I was rebuilding, and the people I was empowering along the way. Carter was part of my past, but he had no place in my future. As I turned back to my work, a sense of peace settled over me. I wasn't the same person I'd been when Glimmer first started. I was stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever. And this time, I wasn't just building a company. I was building a legacy. For the first time in years, I felt truly free.